Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as a part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 13 years now. My current role is within the research and analytics part of our thought leadership function, and prior to that I've worked with the City of London around valuation and our engagement with that particular part of the marketplace, and also worked in our standards team. And I'm currently working on a AI standard in terms of the responsible use of AI for the profession. Obviously, with 110,000 members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle through land use, planning, development, valuation, brokerage, construction, property management and building surveying, it's obviously a very rich background in which the effect of AI, data and tech is really having a profound and hopefully valuable role to play with the profession. And obviously our members also work across all the major asset types, whether it's residential, land itself, commercial real estate, alternatives and infrastructure. And I'm really pleased today to have Jeremy Handley joining me, who's got a great backstory in the profession and is also doing a lot of work with Forbury at the moment. So maybe, Jeremy, I could ask you to give a bit of a thumbnail sketch of your background and the kind of work you're doing with Forbury.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, so I've been a valuer all of my career. I spent over 30 years, or nearly 30 years rather, as part of the valuation team at Jones Lang LaSalle in London. And for much of that time, I was involved with valuation systems, reporting systems, property and valuation analysis. So it's always been an interest and an area of some specialisation. I'm currently working as a consultant for a number of sort of prop tech and valuation services companies. Most relevant for today is my work with Forbury. Forbury, as some of the viewers may know, is a software company that specialises in DCF Excel-based software. And they were acquired last year by Altus, so we're part of the Altus stable now, which is gives some great opportunities for both parts of the business. And it's a very interesting place to be at the moment, in this market, with the property and valuation industries going through change, probably accelerated change actually, and modernisation. So you might say about time too, but that's maybe something we'll get into.
Thanks. Well, it's great you raised that sort of sense of a real kind of sense of change in the sector, and particularly in that valuation space. And as ever, so much of the debate, unfortunately, sometimes tend to focus on AVMs, and it's great that today we're actually going to talk about a different emphasis here in terms of particularly around commercial real estate and how that's valued. And it's really apposite that we really focus today, I think, on the whole subject of DCF's discounted cash flows. And I guess my first question to you, and a really open and profound one, I guess, is, are DCFs the future of valuation? And if so, why?
As you say, fundamental, and that was very much the result of the independent review of real estate investment valuations that was a couple of years ago now, which definitely came down on the side of DCF as the principal method of valuation for investment properties, but also interestingly encouraged the use of more advanced analytical techniques. And I think that's DCF also fits into that actually. So is it the future? I think it certainly is part of the future. I think it's not the whole of the future. I think there's some real benefits to DCF, improved transparency, better understanding across the profession and other professions and internationally. All of those things are pointed out by the report. I think there's also benefits for risk management, exposing errors and things, but I think it's also really important for valuers to have a wider and deeper language around advice. And valuers are not just number crunchers, they are advisors. And I think it's all too easy, if you focus on systems and numbers, to just think of valuers as producing a number. But that's not really what their true value is. In my case, that's just one of their tools. We also have to remember the DCF is frequently used in the market to underwrite acquisitions, so it is a market approach. And then I think that's another really important thing for valuers, is that you've got to follow the market. When valuers aren't there to make the market, they're there to reflect the market. And so following market practice is vitally important. So yeah, it's definitely part of the future, but not in isolation to other approaches. It's part of the toolbox that valuers, advisors, agents, and owners and investors should have. And it's also not suitable for every market and every property, which I think we'll probably come on to in time. But a move to DCF, I don't think is as overwhelming as perhaps some people may first have thought, but it is a highly valuable tool.
Indeed, and as you said, obviously the RICS review made a number of recommendations, to which I think, particularly apposite in terms of our conversation about using DCF, and as you say, more analytics from that approach as well. I mean, given that this has been, the direction of travel that RICS have now, recommended. What does it mean for the sector more broadly? And also, I guess, for some valuers who perhaps haven't been using DCF to a large extent, what does it mean to them in terms of how they make the move and how they kind of evolve to this, as you say, not necessarily just DCF, but this environment where they're going to be using DCF more as one of the tools in their toolbox?
I think the first thing to say is obviously the RICS have pushed for and recommended a move towards DCF and highlighted the need for modernization. It's not actually a new technique, of course. It's been around for a very long time. And I think the RICS still have a very important role to play in this. It's encouraging, discussing, helping the industry make that change. But also understanding the challenges of adopting DCF on a wider basis and understanding its limitations. It's not going to be suitable for every situation. And the RICS's involvement may include training, particularly around interpretation. Discounted cash flow is a technique, but we've all got to get used to that different language, understanding the results, getting comfortable. And also they may be able to help with signposting, for example, for data sources, because there is a bit more data that's needed.
Yeah.
Not all advisors are going to have ready access to that data. And I would hope rather that maybe the academic world, universities, if they're not already partnering with the RICS, that maybe there's scope for that to happen, because after all, they are experts in training and education. They may well have some of this data as well, and education doesn't end with getting a degree, as we all know when we're doing our CPD. So I think there's a big role there, and it's much more, in my view anyway, than just saying we need to move towards DCF. I think there has to be a support in place. I mean, in terms of how valuers make the move, I think the first thing to remember is that many property professionals are already instinctively reflecting and considering many of the factors that are in DCF. And so actually being more explicit about it is just a logical progression, in my view. To make the move, there will be a degree of retooling and retraining, but perhaps just as important is a mindset shift or cultural shift in how we approach valuations, not just learning the techniques, but really understanding them and using them as a sort of a default rather than necessarily just saying, oh, well, I've got to do it to tick a box. So I think that's an important factor as well. I also think that part of the move is, well, in fact, a permanent part of the move is not just thinking of DCF in isolation. There will be properties where DCF is the most obvious and primary approach, but I don't think it should ever be used in isolation for most situations for commercial investments anyway. And that we should be using DCF alongside traditional valuations as an analysis, or traditional valuations alongside DCF as an analysis as well, just as we would often look at capital value per square foot as a sense check or a balance. And it should be considered in that vein, I believe. And for that to happen, I think advisors have to get very much more comfortable, not just with the mechanics, but also the feel. Most experienced valuers can look at a valuation and they they've got a sense that if I do this, this will happen. I'm comfortable with the results. It fit, I'll put some numbers in, but it feels about right. And I suspect that most valuers are not in that position with DCF yet, but that needs to happen. That will happen with use. But I think you can build up the use cases in stages to take you to that place of comfort. The first one, obviously, is comparable analysis. For more traditional approaches, a lot of comparable analysis can be done in your head, on a piece of paper, calculators, quick and easy. But we need to move to a position where, or continue to move to that position where comparables are analysed in a slightly deeper way, because it's going to be a bit more complicated. For that, we need software that's quick and easy to use, because you can't spend hours and hours analysing every transaction that you see. So I think comparable analysis is, if you like, the first use case to really establish. And then it's the side-by-side valuation, which I know is already happening, where valuers are perhaps adopting a traditional approach and then dual running on a DCF approach, or maybe vice versa. That has cost implications at the moment, and probably will do, because you are doing more work. And of course, the systems at the moment don't support that dual running very well. Although I think that is changing. The message has got through to the industry, the software industry, and certainly I know Altus and Forbury are doing a lot of work in that area. And then the third use case is really using DCF as your primary method of valuation, but still supported by other methods, traditional valuations, capital value per square foot, whatever it might be. But for it to lead as your opinion setter, if you like, you have to be sufficiently comfortable that you've got the results are understood and are as you would expect. There are, of course, other use cases, not just for valuers, but other users of valuations and owners of real estate. So business planning, portfolio modelling, risk management, all of those sort of things. So there's a lot of stages. It doesn't have to be a big bang. It shouldn't be a big bang, because mistakes will get made. I think there is another factor, though, and that's the client side. While valuers must follow market trends, they must follow market approaches, it's quite difficult if if clients don't understand the reason for that, or even value that as an approach, because there will be cost implications in doing more. And I think one of the things that would perhaps help is to get that level of acceptance from clients is if valuers and clients, maybe with the RICS, come together and agree some basic reporting requirements, because obviously the recent review has implications for clients as well around changing valuers and valuation techniques. And so they're used to what they've been getting, and if we're going to have new techniques being used far more frequently, it'll be really good to establish some baselines in terms of terminology and outputs and things, which I don't think are a competitive thing between valuers. It's really to make it easier for clients to get their heads around what's going on. If the RICS want DCF to be a universally accepted approach, what's wrong with having a universally accepted type of basic output?
Yeah, indeed. And from a kind of a data and tech and sort of tools perspective, how do you think this move to DCF in the UK will affect the availability and development of modelling and other tools? I mean, you mentioned just the very prosaic issue of if you're going to do a traditional and a DCF, you don't want to have to rekey information. You want that to be a really elegant process just from that kind of perspective. How do you see that market evolving to support the profession with tools that are effective and also transparent, because we don't want to end up with black boxes either, do we?
Absolutely not. I mean, and that's a black box is a general criticism for more traditional approaches. In actual fact, it's another benefit of DCF is it's much more explicit. So I think there's no doubt that valuation modelling tools need to evolve, and they need to evolve quite quickly to support a greater use of DCF. But those tools, as you alluded to, need to make the job easier, not more difficult. Double keying not only is desperately inefficient, but it's highly risky. You know,
yeah,
people make errors. So at Forbury, we've totally rebuilt the DCF software for the UK market, and it's very firmly focused on usability. We think it only takes fairly minimal training to use, and it's also very easy to come back to it, because it's easy to think that everyone using software is using it for modeling, is using it day in, day out, and that's clearly not the case. And we all know what it's like when we've done our training and then we go back 2 weeks later and we can't remember how to use something. So we've really focused on those aspects, and we've also built the ability, and this is one of the benefits of being part of the Alter stable. We've built the ability to import and export AE files now. So the property side of the data, and that's something, that tighter integration is going to only continue to provide more choice for valuers, agents, owners, etc. The holy grail for me and valuers is just to be able to do, use one set of data to provide all the bases of valuation that you need. And that's definitely something we're working on, and I think is relatively imminent. I think the other thing that's really important when it comes to modelling choices is reporting, because reporting is very important as an advisor, because it helps your clients understand what you've done and why, and it gives you the basis for your decision making, and it stops this black box impression that everyone gets about some ways of approaching valuations. So again, because Forbury is Excel based, reporting is actually really easy. You can we've got a small stable of reports, but you can design your own very easily with fairly basic Excel skills, and integrate other calculations. So you might have bespoke calculations that you want to do for that particular job or for that particular client, so they can be integrated easily as well. I'm cautious actually about many property professionals creating their own full-blown DCF models from scratch. I think you have to be very skilled and have proper testing regimes as well, which clearly all the big software houses will have anyway. It's also very time-consuming to build models from scratch, and in my experience, most valuers and agents, they know their markets really well, but their skills are not necessarily in modelling, and that's where these models come in. The flexibility of something like Forbury, and there'll be others out there, become really important, because it gives you that nice balance between a commercial model and the ability to bespoke it as you feel you need to. Other factors, that affect modelling choices are things like the ability to transfer and share data. So you'll be able to create AE files from Forbury, and you can already create some of that data, but you'll be able to create full AE files in the future. And Forbury is easy to share because it's Excel. You can just share it in a very straightforward manner. I suppose the key for choosing your software or finding good software is it's got to make it easier, not more difficult. You don't want to spend your time fighting the computer. It wants to be a tool that you're in control of. And so everyone will have a different view on what they really need.
And I guess I almost wanted to return to something that I think you kind of alluded to earlier, in the fact that obviously there is going to be a journey for valuers to integrate DCF more. Is there still a perception of DCF being more labour intensive, both perhaps from the kind of technical side, but also just perhaps the greater and deeper parts of information that you need? You talked about needing more analytics on the comps, for example. So what's the overall sense you get of the market when it's given this challenge to say, right, do more DCF? What's the resistance there, if I can use that slightly kind of less diplomatic phrase?
I mean, DCF is definitely seen as more complex and labour intensive, and I think to a degree that's true. but I think you already see that more sophisticated valuations have for a long time been far more explicit than they used to be. We've actually come a very long way from the pure all risks yield approach.
Yeah.
And a lot of valuations now are modelled with explicit risks built in, so voids, rent frees, all of those sort of things. So, and although I think there needs to be, if you like, a cultural shift or a mental shift, it's not so very far from where a lot of valuers already are. It's just the articulation of it is somewhat different. Yeah, there is some more data and some more thought process required. Rental growth, exit yields are notoriously difficult. And of course, the sooner you want to assume your exit, the more relevant that is. But I think good software, to a large extent, can reduce the burden. Things like, again, in Forbury, but other systems as well, house views, which allow you to set at a firm level rental growth, leasing assumptions, allow you to build up a valuation initially very, very quickly. We use AI to import tenancy information, so that can be very quick. And you can really start modelling properly in literally a couple of minutes. Yes, I think there needs more thought, and there is a bit more data involved, but I don't think, once you made the mental leap, I don't think it's as big as everyone thinks, or some people think, particularly when we've got to this stage where you can do dual running without rekeying data. That's the killer. Valuation fees, frankly, are way for thin a lot of the time, and there just isn't the capacity to spend a lot more time doing this stuff, and then we need to find quicker ways of doing it, which is definitely happening. We're just not quite there as an industry yet, I think.
So on that point of that you made, I think very compellingly, that we've kind of moved away to a large extent from that more monolithic all risk yield applied to a particular asset, given we've almost begun that journey towards the DCF. Do you think the kind of debate, the kind of slightly binary debate of traditional valuation approaches versus DCF, do you think that's almost moved on, and that actually there's a recognition that we've begun that journey to more explicit, more nuanced, if I can use that phrase, valuations, where, as you say, you're taking account of voids and options on renewal and all the various kind of parameters and rental growth? Do you think that argument's almost, a historical one now?
I think to a large extent that's right. I mean, it's not the case in all situations, and of course, that sort of explicit approach is still not appropriate for every market and every type of property. Your small shop in a local town that's always going to appeal to a local market, they're probably not going to be interested in IRRs and rental growth forecasts. It will be very, very implicit, and so you've got to use the right technique in the right situation. But I think the understanding that you have to be more explicit is already baked into the valuer psyche, and we're also, to some extent, just talking about language, and we all need to learn to use slightly different language that works better with DCF. I'm not saying there isn't anything else to do, but I think a lot of that debate has been had, really.
Indeed. And you've raised this very valid point earlier on about reporting and what the client sees, and I guess it's fair to say that the RICS review was very much driven by putting ourselves in the shoes of those clients, those end users of valuation, and what they wanted from valuation. What would you summarize as really what advisors and investors will get out of having a DCF? Clearly, it's more explicit, it's more open, it's more transparent. But what does that mean in the real world, given that obviously, investors look at that value themselves? They make their own calculations internally about their perceptions of value and worth to them of particular assets and particular portfolios.
Well, I think certainly greater transparency and sort of uncovering the nuts and bolts of the property and being able to discuss and articulate that is a great benefit. I think you make the point that many investors and owners are already using cash flows as part of their business planning. Yet traditionally, a lot of their advisors have not spoken that language, and so I think having everyone speaking the same language is a big advantage in terms of understanding, especially where you're dealing with perhaps other professions or other, internationally. So I think there's a lot of advantage there. I think risk management, both in terms of actual real estate risk management, and so for lenders and things, it's not that. It's certainly in my experience, lenders have not traditionally asked for cash flows and things. So either they're calculating themselves or they're just not seeing that information. So I think the risk management also is enhanced for advisors, because perhaps they get a clearer view of what's going on by being more explicit. And then you've got all of the benefits for owners of business planning and using the same tools perhaps that their advisors are. So I think also the combination of different approaches, so not just using a discounted cash flow, but using a traditional analysis or the other way around, it should enhance the reliability of valuations, because you're not just looking at it from a single standpoint. You're looking at it from other views. I'm not saying that doesn't happen at the moment, but it's not formalized in quite the same way that it would be if you're using multiple approaches at the same time.
I mean, one question that's always fascinated me, and I'm sure you'll have the insight to this, is, when I talk to various practitioners around the world, that the UK does seem to have been a bit of an outlier in terms of its slower adoption of DCF compared to other jurisdictions. Are there, what are the reasons behind that? Is it still around a kind of a perception of DCF that's driven that? Is it the nature of the market? Why have we perhaps been a bit of an outlier in that way?
I think there's multiple reasons. I mean, the UK has perhaps got a longer tradition of appraisal than some other countries, and certainly we've got a very mature market. So we've got established valuation practice where there's been relatively little demand for change, and so there's valuers haven't been put in that position where they felt they needed to change. I think also, as other countries have sort of found they need to have bigger appraisal industries, if you like, they've looked for what is probably a more logical approach, which is discount cash flow. So they've sort of leapfrogged the more traditional approach and gone straight to DCF. And some countries use DCF, but perhaps not in the way that we're talking about now, maybe simplified or whatever. And the point has been made by many valuers, of course, that a traditional valuation is still a discounted cash flow. It's just a slightly different approach and less explicit. So I think it's just an accident of history to a large extent, and a lack of pressure for change from the client base. But I learned DCF when I was at Polytechnic in the 1980s, a very long time ago, and I was shocked then when I started work to find that not only was DCF not used, because it seemed a much more logical approach to me as a newbie, it wasn't even well understood in the industry. And I think we have come on from that quite a long way, but we still need to make that change, I think, and embrace it as a technique.
Indeed. I mean, in addition, obviously, to the RICS review and the recommendations, I mean, do you feel the emergence of a bigger, set of operational real estate has also driven this? Because obviously the days when it was very monolithic office, retail, sheds, it has moved on. There's a lot more alternatives and operational, and obviously we've always been valuing trade-related premises, but there seems to be clearly a much bigger asset class now, which is very much looking at a DCF approach. Do you think that's driven adoption as well?
I think it certainly helps, because you're certainly going to get people saying, well, if you're valuing your student accommodation or your self-storage on this basis, why aren't you using that elsewhere? But it's also interesting, isn't it, that the newer asset classes also leapfrog a more traditional approach and go straight to a DCF, which is similar to what I was describing for other countries that have developed their appraisal businesses. So I think that pressure is undoubtedly there, and I actually think that it makes far more sense that real estate that appeals to a certain sector of the market, i.e. the perhaps more sophisticated buyers, should all have a commonality of approach, even if there are other forms of analysis that are used to support that. Wouldn't it be better if the language was the same across all of them?
Indeed. And a final question, I always like to sort of slightly ambush my conversations with thinking about the future, but in terms of how this is going to progress over the next few years. I think one thing I'm particularly interested in is whether you feel, from a kind of data analytics, data availability, we've got enough data to support these more explicit approaches to DCF, because clearly the challenge is they're explicit, they're much more detailed, but the downside, if you could use that phrase, is you do need the data, and you want that more detailed data and a lot of analytics and a lot of market projections as well, whether it's exit yields or rental growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point. I think the larger houses have got access to this information. I think it's much more difficult when, frankly, you get to the level where you don't have big research departments. So you're having to buy that data in, which also doesn't help with the the cost implications. So I think access to data is a problem. But it's also interpreting that data. And I said right at the very beginning, I thought there's a role for perhaps universities, RICS or whoever to help with the interpretation or help with the training for interpretation. And I think that's very important, because it's not just about having the data, it's how do you adjust that? Because if you're valuing in the City of London, you're just not going to use the standard City of London rental growth in every situation. You'll need to refine it, and it's getting a feel for that and understanding it is going to be important, and very much so on exit yields. I mean, it's it can be a very sensitive part of a DCF, and so I think thought and the commonality of approach that needs to work through, and that's partly a client thing as well. So if clients understand the general approach, because when you're valuing for the market, you're not necessarily valuing on the same hold period as every other potential purchaser, because they're all going to have a slightly different view. From a sensitivity point of view, and sensitivity analysis is very important, and when we look at systems, we must make sure that has good sensitivity analysis. But you can reduce the sensitivity clearly by pushing out your exit yield to later in the cash flow.
Indeed. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and obviously this is a journey for the sector which will continue for a number of years, but hopefully data and tech can play a role in making that journey smoother and more effective. But for today, Jeremy, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been a fascinating chat.
Thank you very much.